In a fierce blizzard sweeping through Gallatin Valley, Montana, a young biker named Eli Carter tried to race through Bridger Pass to reach Missoula before the roads were sealed off. The wind howled in gusts, the snow so thick it obscured the road, leaving only an endless white expanse that swallowed the sky. Suddenly, Eli's Harley-Davidson Road King shuddered violently, its rear wheel skidding before the engine died mid-road. He tried to restart it, but only heard a weak sputter before silence. His phone screen flashed two cold words: no service. Eli raised the phone, stumbling a few steps through the snow, desperately searching for a signal in the white void. Nothing but the howling wind and the echo of the dead engine in his mind. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice lost in the storm, but it was. He bent down to check, pulling off his gloves to grip a wrench. The metal was cold as stone, biting through his hands, numbing them. He tried to turn the wheel's bolts, but his hands shook, the tool slipped from the nut, and he collapsed into the deep snow. Eli gasped, his knees numb, his leather jacket soaked. He tried again, using all his strength, but the bike wouldn't budge. The cold seeped into his core, mingling with despair and anger. Every biker's journey carried some danger, but this was different. He was truly stranded in the wilds of Montana. No people, no signal, no way out. He looked up, scanning around. No cars, no lights, just an endless field of snow. His eyes narrowed. In the distance, a faint yellow light flickered through the blizzard, like a candle in the icy night. Eli pushed his bike, trudging toward it. Each step was a struggle, his boots sinking deep, the wind shoving him back. Finally, he saw it clearly. A small log cabin, alone among the pines, thin smoke rising from its chimney, a weak glow spilling through a misty curtain. He pounded on the door, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Hello, anyone there?" The door opened, warmth flooding out with the light. A silver-haired man with broad shoulders, wearing a threadbare old military jacket, stood at the threshold. His eyes were deep and calm, as if he'd seen everything life could offer. This was Frank Dalton, a Vietnam War Marine veteran, now living alone in these mountains. He looked at the young man, then at the snow-covered Harley, saying nothing, only nodding slightly. "Bring it to the garage." Frank grabbed a flashlight and led the way. Eli silently pushed the bike, wind whistling around them, snow clinging to their shoulders. In the garage, the flashlight beam lit up old wooden panels, neatly arranged tools, and the familiar smell of motor oil. Frank knelt, opened the hood, and checked each part. His hands, though trembling slightly with age, were steady and skilled. Eli held the light, watching quietly, realizing this wasn't an ordinary old man. Every movement belonged to someone who'd lived a life of mechanics and battlefields, fixing things with his own hands. Their breaths turned to white vapor in the cold air. No words, no questions, just the dry clank of metal breaking the silence. Frank tightened a bolt, adjusted the spark plug, cleaned the filter, then said softly, "Try it again." Eli pressed the starter. The Harley roared to life, deep and steady, resounding through the blizzard like a heartbeat revived. Frank nodded, the flashlight beam catching his weathered face. He turned, pointing toward the kitchen inside. "Come in, hot coffee." Eli removed his helmet, looking at him, managing only a "thank you." Frank responded with a nod. Outside, the wind still screamed. The snow fell thick, but in the garage, the warmth of this stranger spread, like a small flame holding hope against the storm engulfing the world. Frank lit the oil stove, a small golden flame flickering in the old wooden room. He poured black coffee from a worn aluminum pot, handing Eli a scratched metal mug so marred that the fire's reflection on it was dull. The smell of coffee mixed with the acrid scent of burning wood, creating a rich, nostalgic aroma. The house was starkly simple, but every corner bore traces of a life shaped by war. On the wall hung a faded American flag, neatly folded in a glass frame. Nearby were medals, photos of young soldiers in uniform, smiling brightly amid red dirt hills and gloomy skies. Another frame held a black and white portrait, a group of soldiers in a jungle, one of them bearing a striking resemblance to Frank, 40 years younger, eyes blazing with fire. Eli looked around, silent for a long moment, then said softly, "You were in the service." Frank looked up, the fire reflecting in his pale gray eyes, and replied slowly, "Marines, He-San, 68. His voice held no pride, only the weariness of heavy memories. Eli pressed on, voice full of respect. "You made it back." Frank gave a faint smile, thin as smoke. "I came back, but part of me stayed there." The words drifted with the crackling fire, making the room seem to hush. Eli lowered his eyes, clutching the hot coffee mug, His fingers cracked from the cold. "We always respect you guys," he said quietly. "Not every leather jacket is a criminal. The Hells Angels, we still help veterans, the homeless, orphans, but people only see the tattoos, not the heart." Frank looked at the young man. His hair was soaked, cheeks red from the wind, but his eyes held something real, a loyalty, pride and loneliness. Frank knew too well. Frank poured more coffee, saying softly, "Back then we called each other brothers. Didn't matter rich or poor, black or white, just surviving together or not." Eli smiled. "Same with us. The road's cold and long, but brothers are home." The two men, one old, one young, sat across from each other by the fire, needing few words. Outside, the wind whistled through the door's gaps, snowflakes tapping the window like someone wanting in. Frank stood slowly, grabbing a wrench, motioning for Eli to follow. "Your bike's still got issues, belt's too tight, might snap again by morning." Eli stood, following him to the garage. They bent over the snow-soaked Harley, two pairs of hands, one aged and trembling but steady, the other young and strong but stiff from cold, working under the dim yellow light. Frank checked the belt, showing Eli how to adjust it properly. "Not everyone gets a Harley," he said, voice raspy. "They're stubborn, but treat them right, they listen." Eli nodded, watching intently, like a student with a true teacher. "Like people," he replied. Frank smiled, a small, rare smile. It softened his rugged face, making him look younger, like in those old photos. For the first time in years, he smiled genuinely. The little house in the woods seemed to warm slightly, as if the storm outside retreated further. When Frank tightened the final bolt, Eli wiped his hands, looking up. "Thanks, sir. Storm's probably easing up." Frank set the wrench down, glancing out the window. "Every storm passes. What matters is who survives." He spoke as if to himself. Outside, the wind still howled, but in the garage, there was only the soft hum of the Harley, steady as the breath of two lost souls who'd found each other in the long night. When the Harley's engine roared again, deep and steady, Eli let out a relieved breath. He turned, pulling out his wallet, taking out a few bills, trying to press them into Frank's hand. "I gotta pay you, man. You saved me in this storm." Frank shook his head, his lean hand gently pushing the money back. "Keep it, and buy some decent gloves. Don't pay for kindness." His voice was low but firm, like an order. Eli stood still for a moment, then closed his wallet, lips pressed tight, a mix of gratitude and respect welling up. Frank stepped inside, inviting Eli to a simple dinner, a thin soup, a few slices of stale bread, and weak coffee from the old black pot. They sat across a scratched wooden table, lit only by the dim yellow lamp through a foggy curtain. The wind still howled outside. But in the small room, there was only the soft clink of spoons against bowls, the smell of smoke and bitter coffee blending together. Eli ate slowly, glancing around, realizing the house was like its owner, old, silent and achingly lonely. The ceiling was stained. The wooden roof leaked in one spot, water dripping into a bucket in the corner. A window had a long crack, letting in drafts that made the fireplace flame flicker. He looked at the old photos on the wall. Comrades, bases, young faces with distant gazes, then back at Frank. He was eating slowly, as if to hold on to the warmth or avoid thinking. Eli said softly, "You live here alone?" Frank didn't look up, only replied, 11 years now. "The longer you're here, the less you need to say." "Family?" Eli asked. Frank paused, setting down his spoon, staring into the small flame. "Wife's gone. Kids don't call. War takes a lot, even how people trust each other." His voice was light, but each word felt heavy. Eli gripped his coffee mug, feeling the cold seep into his chest. He wanted to say something but could only manage. "I could help fix this place up. I know some woodworkers in Bozeman. You shouldn't be out here alone like this." Frank looked at him, the corner of his mouth lifting in a smile, both grateful and weary. "I get by with it. This house is like me, cracked, but still standing." He stood, poured more coffee and handed it to Eli. "Drink, stay warm." The gesture was gentle but enough to quiet Eli. They sat a while longer, silent, the wind outside mixed with the clank of metal on the roof, like the ticking of old time. As the wall clock neared midnight, the storm began to ease. Eli put on his jacket, donned his helmet, and stepped onto the porch. The snow fell lighter, the moon peeking through clouds. He turned back, saying, "Thanks, sir, for everything, not just the bike." Frank crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "On the road of life, everyone gets stuck in a storm sometime. You're lucky if someone stops." Eli nodded, his eyes glinting under the light. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small item, a Hell's Angels patch, white wings on a red background, silver-stitched border. He placed it on the table by the door, saying softly, "We don't forget those who lend a hand. See this? You'll know your brothers are around." Frank looked at the patch, saying nothing, only nodding slowly. Eli started the bike. The Harley's engine roared, echoing through the night, then faded into the snow, leaving a faint trail of light like a falling star. Frank stood on the porch, watching the red taillight shrink, a strange warm ache rising in his chest. For the first time in years, his heart beat hard, like someone had touched the human part of him he thought died on the battlefield long ago. The wind blew, carrying cold, and the smell of smoke. But in that moment, amid the vast snow-covered mountains, Frank no longer felt alone. The first sound of a bike came to Frank like thunder from the earth. He opened his eyes, sitting up in the wooden chair by the cooled fireplace. The gray light of a winter morning slipped through the curtain, catching dust floating in the air. The heavy, steady rumble of engines echoed from a distance. 1, then 2, then 10, then hundreds. The ground began to tremble slightly, the old coffee mug on the table quivering. Frank frowned, stepping onto the porch, pulling on his worn, thick jacket. The morning wind bit with a sharp chill, but he barely felt it as the scene unfolded before him. Along the dirt road to his house, a long line of Harley-Davidsons stretched, their chrome gleaming through the snowy haze. The engine's roar blended, shaking the valley. A metallic and fiery chorus. Exhaust smoke rose white, clouding the air. Black leather jackets bearing skull and wings emblems fluttering. Frank couldn't count them. Hundreds, maybe over 1,000 bikers lined up, bike after bike stretching to the main road. Each wore a helmet, eyes behind dark glasses, jackets adorned with Hell's Angels, Montana chapter patches. He stood frozen, disbelieving. Neighboring houses in the distance slammed shut, curtains drawn. Dogs barked faintly, mixed with the wind. A police car approached from afar but stopped half a mile away, no one daring to come closer. The air was thick, both majestic and menacing, as if hell itself had paused before his yard. Frank gripped the porch railing, heart pounding. He muttered, "What the hell is this?" His mind raced with possibilities. A misunderstanding. Maybe the bikers were here for revenge. Or worse, he'd been dragged into something from last night's kid. The wind stung his face. Cold but not enough to cool the heat rising in his chest. From the front of the line, one rider broke away. A matte black Harley rolled slowly toward the cabin, gliding over the thin snow. Its engine purred low and steady, not roaring like the others. The rider removed his helmet, an older man, maybe in his 60s, with long white hair tied back, a thick gray-streaked beard. His eyes were deep, calm, carrying the authority of someone respected by thousands. His leather jacket bore a faded Hell's Angels emblem, a small embroidered line on the left chest. Road Captain, Had National. Frank swallowed hard. The man dismounted, climbing the wooden steps, stopping before him. "You Frank Dalton?" His voice was low, raspy and clear, cutting through the engines behind. Frank nodded, cautious. "Yeah, that's me." The man nodded slightly, his gaze not threatening, only seasoned with experience. "Last night a kid named Eli Carter was out in the cold. You pulled him and his bike into your place, right?" Frank frowned, then nodded again.
"Yeah, he was stuck in the storm.
"I just helped him get the bike running." The man took a deep breath, glancing at the silent line of bikes in the snow. Then he turned back to Frank, speaking softly but clearly. "That kid is the son of one of ours, Ray Carter's boy." Frank blinked, as if struck hard in the chest. The name, though unfamiliar, carried a strange weight in the man's voice. "Ray Carter. I don't know him." "You don't need to," the biker said, voice lowering. "But you should know those thousands out there. They know. Ray saved a lot of our brothers' lives. And now you saved his son." Frank fell silent. Hundreds of engines hummed steadily, like the heartbeat of the earth. The man looked around, then continued.
"We don't forget those who help our own."
"You did a good thing, and to us that means everything." Frank didn't know how to respond. Before him was a sea of leather-clad men, tattooed, weathered faces, but their eyes held something quiet and genuine, a rare respect. He felt caught between two worlds. One, his past on the battlefield. The other, this present with men society feared but who lived by their own code of honor. The wind gusted, lifting Hell's Angels flags, sunlight glinting off chrome helmets. Frank stood there, silent, hands gripping the railing. while before him over 1,000 Harleys rumbled softly in the snow, a symphony of freedom and loyalty. And for the first time in a long while, Frank didn't feel alone. The older man set his helmet on the porch step, his gaze softening. "Name's Nick Callahan," he said slowly, voice rough with wind and years. "Brothers call me Raven. I'm the president of the Northwest chapter of Hell's Angels." Frank nodded slightly, still dazed amid the hum of hundreds of engines beating like a pulse. Raven stepped closer, pulling a small object wrapped in old cloth from his leather jacket. He unwrapped it with calloused hands, revealing a tarnished metal dog tag, rusted with time. He spoke slowly, as if afraid his words might shake the past. "You helped Eli Carter, right? But that kid, he's the son of Tom Callahan." The name hit Frank like a bullet through memory's fog. His body froze, eyes widening, breath catching in his chest. "Tom Callahan?" he repeated, barely a whisper. Raven nodded, holding the dog tag forward. "And Tom was the man you saved at Kedsan." Time seemed to stop. All sounds, the Harleys, the wind, the murmurs, faded into a void. Frank stared at the tiny piece of metal. Its faded inscription was still clear to him. Callahan, TJ, USMC 1968. His legs buckled, his trembling hand touching the tag. Images flooded back, the Kedsan jungle ablaze, smoke rising from the ground, comrades falling one by one, screams, desperate calls. And in that hell a young soldier named Tom Callahan, badly wounded, blood soaking the sand, still smiling weakly as Frank carried him on his shoulder, running from the fire line. "Go, Dalton." Tom's voice echoed somewhere in memory, but Frank couldn't save him. A bullet cut through the air. Tom collapsed in his arms, eyes wide, and Frank had screamed amid the bombs. That scene had been buried in his mind for nearly half a century, seemingly erased by time. Yet now, with one name, one rusted tag, it all surged back, vivid and brutal. He sank onto the porch step, clutching the dog tag until his hand bled. Tears fell, mixing with the snow. Frank Dalton, who hadn't shed a tear in 47 years, trembled like a child. Raven said nothing, only stood there, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He understood that pain, the pain of those who carried war's memories for life. Finally, he knelt beside Frank, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "I know you don't remember me," Raven said softly, "but I remember. I'm Tom's younger brother." Frank looked up, staring through tears, breath white in the cold air. "No way. Tom only mentioned a kid brother in high school." "Yeah," Raven nodded. "I was 16 when he enlisted. You were the last to see him alive. After the war, the military sent back a few belongings, including an unfinished letter about the friend who saved his life. Your name, Frank Dalton." His voice was low but firm, ringing through the thick air of snow and exhaust. "I searched for that name for 20 years. Then one day, Eli shows up, saying an old man in Montana pulled him out of a blizzard, gave him hot coffee, and wouldn't take money. When he told the story, I knew." Raven paused, eyes gazing into the distance. "Only one man lived like that. The one my brother called the man who kept his last promise." Frank gripped the tag, tears falling silently. He choked out, "I tried. I carried him. I didn't want to let go. I'm sorry I couldn't bring him home." Raven shook his head, light as the breeze. "You don't owe us anything, Frank. On the contrary, you're the one who gave my brother a chance to die with honor. We're not here to judge you, but to repay you." Frank bowed his head, shoulders shaking. He'd thought war was just a distant nightmare, but now it returned in the form of loyalty, of men in leather, of a bond enduring through decades. Raven squeezed his shoulder, voice hoarse with emotion. "We're here to repay you for my brother. You saved him from hell once. Now it's our turn to pull you out of loneliness." Frank looked up through tears. Behind Raven, the bikers stood silent in the snow, their bikes facing the small house, hundreds quietly bowing their heads, not out of fear, but respect. Frank Dalton, the old soldier who thought the world had forgotten him, stood in Montana's wind, feeling the pulse of humanity he'd lost since 1968. As the sun rose over the Bridger Range, pale golden light pierced the thick snowy mist, and the entire Gallatin Valley reverberated with the sound of hundreds of engines starting in unison. The roar of Harleys blended with laughter, hammers, and saws, the sound of life amidst the bitter winter. Raven signaled with a wave, and groups of bikers split off like well-trained military units. One group began clearing snow from the yard, carving paths with steel shovels. Another hauled sheets of metal and wood from trucks parked in the distance, carrying them to Frank's roof. A man climbed onto the roof, secured by a rope welding the frame with a gas torch, its orange glow blazing against the white snow. Another group chopped firewood, stacking it neatly by the porch. Others repaired the rotting wooden walls, patching holes the wind had blown through for years. On tattooed arms, sweat mingled with melting snow. A young biker in a red bandana hammered while whistling. Another laughed while working. "Don't let this roof cave before we're done, brothers." No one replied. Only hoarse laughter echoed through the wind. The scene resembled an army, not one of war but of compassion. They, once viewed with wary eyes, called outcasts, were now rebuilding a life for an old soldier they'd never met. Frank stood on the porch watching in silence. The cold wind stung his face, but he felt no chill. Before him, hundreds of Hell's Angels in leather jackets welded, hammered, sawed, and carried planks, each movement strong yet careful. Some replaced the broken window, others fixed the chimney, some cleared the snow-covered path, laying new bricks on the porch. They needed no orders, no thanks, just worked, quiet and persistent, as if born to mend what was broken. A neighbor woman watched from afar, bewildered. Then, seeing a biker bend to pick up a fallen board and pat another's shoulder to make way, she hesitated, then brought out a tray of hot coffee, her hands trembling from wind and fear. A tall, bald biker with tattoos covering his neck bowed in thanks, taking the tray with both hands. His smile was so kind it stunned her. From then on, other neighbors brought out cookies, then soup, then blankets. The quiet dirt road became a meeting place for people who, just yesterday, wouldn't dare meet each other's eyes. In the yard's corner, Frank saw village kids peeking from behind a fence, eyes wide. A biker noticed, waved, removed his sunglasses, and grinned. "Wanna try starting it, kid?" The child hesitated, then nodded. The Harley's engine roared, making him laugh. That laughter carried on the wind like a small melody, waking the slumbering hills. By noon the sky cleared, exhaust and chimney smoke mingling, the scent of burning metal and coffee blending. A Bozeman Daily Chronicle truck stopped at the gate, 2 reporters stepping out, eyes wide at the sight. Over 1,000 Hell's Angels repairing a house for a lone veteran in Montana's snowy mountains. They began filming, interviewing a few. A gray-haired biker looked into the camera, saying softly, "He saved one of ours in 1968. Today it's our turn to save him." The clip spread fast, appearing on local news within hours, titled, "1,000 Hell's Angels Rebuild Home for Lone Veteran." The nation began to notice the little house in the valley, but Frank paid no mind to cameras or reporters. He walked slowly around the yard, fingers brushing newly nailed boards, replaced window frames, freshly painted walls. The wood was still warm, the scent of fresh resin sharp. He paused at the back wall, where a biker was carving a small inscription, "In honor of those who never came home." Frank touched the words, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. The wood's warmth seeped through his skin, like a spark of life he thought long lost. In the distance, Raven leaned against his bike, watching with calm eyes. Frank turned, nodding. No words needed, just understanding between 2 soldiers from different eras. The afternoon sun cast golden light on the long line of Harleys, their metal gleaming like mirrors. Amid it all, Frank Dalton, the forgotten soldier, stood surrounded by leather-clad men the world called reckless, who today brought a fire to the snow, a fire of kindness and brotherhood no condition could buy. That afternoon, as the bikers paused to eat, Raven stepped onto the porch, holding an old envelope wrapped carefully in waxed cloth. He approached Frank, eyes deep and gentle. "I've got something else for you," Raven said, voice rough with emotion. "A letter my brother wrote in 1969. It never reached where it was meant to go." Frank looked up, his eyes clouded by age and tears not yet dried. Raven unwrapped the cloth, revealing a yellowed, torn-edged envelope, the paper inside creased, ink half-faded. The soldier's handwriting was bold and resolute, written by a man living amid smoke and bullets, to Corporal Frank Dalton, "My brother in Kisan." Frank took it, his hands shaking so much the paper trembled. He opened it, took a deep breath, and read slowly, each word cutting into his heart. Asterisk, April 14th, 1969. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. But I want you to know, Dalton, you saved me from certain death, not just with your hands but with your heart. Amid the bullets, I still remember your eyes, calm, fierce and kind. You carried me through burning land, past fallen bodies, past fears we dared not name. I owe you my life, and if I ever get back, I'll find you. I'm not rich, I have nothing to give, but I promise to repay you with the only thing I have, loyalty and a lifetime of thanks." Frank paused, his voice choking. The letter shook in his hands, and the first tears fell, soaking the faded ink. The ink bled, mingling with tears and time, as if the past itself was melting. He gripped the letter, struggling to read the final part. "That you, Dalton, if I don't make it, live for us. Love this world, even if it killed a part of you. Because somewhere, I'll still believe men like you are why this humanity is worth existing for. Tom Callahan." As Frank folded the letter, no one spoke. Around him, bikers stood silent, their rough hands pausing as they saw tears roll down the old soldier's wrinkled face. The wind blew softly, carrying the faint clink of bike chains, like a requiem for souls yet to return. Eli stepped forward, standing by Raven. He pulled a laminated paper from his jacket, handing it to Frank. "My dad, he owed his life to the soldier named Frank Dalton," he said, voice hoarse and trembling. "Every year he'd tell us the story about the man who carried him from gunfire, how he still smiled, though his shirt was soaked with blood. He said, if we ever met you to tell you you didn't just save him, you saved our family, our whole next generation." Frank touched the paper lightly, speechless. It felt like decades of silence in him shattered, like an old dam bursting, letting memories, pain, and gratitude flood out. He looked at Eli, his young face, resolute eyes, and achingly sincere gaze. The image of Tom Callahan in his 1968 uniform overlaid the young man before him, making Frank feel he was seeing his lost friend in his son's form. Raven stood beside, pulling an old Zippo lighter from his leather jacket, engraved with TC. He placed it on the wooden table before Frank. "This was my brother's. They returned it to the family with the letter, but I think you should have it." Frank took the lighter, flicking it to spark a small blue-yellow flame, watching it tremble in the wind. A flame of memory, of brotherhood, of a promise transcending war and time. The bikers stood around, silent. Only the wind through the new roof, the occasional rumble of a Harley, and the drip of melting snow from the porch to the ground. In that moment, in frigid Montana, there was no gap between past and present, soldier and biker, death and life. Only one thing remained: gratitude. Frank clutched the letter to his chest, looking at Raven, at Eli, and said softly, voice trembling but firm, "I didn't think after all these years, anyone would remember Tom, or me." Raven placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes sincere. "Kindness never dies, Frank. It just takes a long journey to find its way home." No one spoke further, but in that silence, Frank knew the thanks that took half a century had finally arrived. That night, snow fell again, light as ash, drifting in the orange glow of a fire burning in the yard. Over 100 Harleys formed a circle around the property, their metal reflecting the flames like a steel moon. Frank sat among them, in his old wooden chair, holding a steaming coffee mug. The fire's heat warmed his cheeks, but his eyes were distant, as if seeing through the flames to another place, another time. The wind carried the smell of burning wood, smoke, and gasoline. Raven sat across, watching silently. After a long pause, Frank spoke, voice low and rough. "You know the worst part of war? Not the bullets, not the blood. It's when you survive." He stopped, staring into the fire, calloused hands gripping the mug. "I lived, they died. Every night I see them, those faces, those calls, like I took someone's place, living for them, when I don't deserve it." The wind gusted across the porch, the fire flaring brighter, illuminating the deep lines on his face. No one spoke, only the crackle of burning wood, the whistle of wind through the trees. Then a young biker, arms covered in tattoos, said softly, "I don't know war, but I know surviving can hurt like dying. The streets are the same. Every ride, we lose someone, a skid, a gun, a fight. And the world only sees the leather, not the brothers left behind each winter." Another, gray-haired with a wolf tattoo on his arm, spoke. "I got kicked out of a church when I tried to hold a funeral for my brother who crashed. They said bikers don't belong in holy ground, but he'd saved a kid from a burning car." His voice choked, then fell silent. The fire lit rugged faces, tattooed, scarred, weary, but their eyes held what Frank had seen in his soldiers: sorrow, loyalty, and nameless loss. Frank took a deep breath, voice trembling. "War made us monsters, then threw us into the world, told us to live normal. You guys, you chased freedom, then got called criminals. Maybe we're not so different." Raven nodded, a weary smile under his silver beard. Your war was with bullets, ours is with prejudice, but both leave scars no one sees. Silence fell. Snow whispered on the roof. The fire flickered, lighting each person's eyes. Those who'd lost parts of themselves on life's long road. Eli, sitting near Frank, added wood, smoke rising high into the black sky. My dad once said, Eli spoke softly, soldiers and bikers are lonely souls carrying loyalty. They don't fight for orders, but for the person beside them. Frank looked at the young man, fire reflecting in his eyes. He nodded slowly. That's right, he said, voice deep. Not for flags, not for glory, only for the one beside you. That's what makes it all worthwhile. Raven stood, grabbing a large coffee pot, refilling everyone's mugs. No whiskey tonight, he grinned. Just coffee, but enough to warm the heart. Frank held his mug, hands trembling, but eyes alight in the fire. He raised it, voice deep in the snowy night. To those who fell in battle, on the road, in our hearts. Raven replied, and to those who rise, keep living. Hundreds of metal mugs rose, glinting in the light. The clink of mugs sounded like soft bells. Then silence, only the falling snow and the breath of the forgotten. Frank looked around, at the leather-clad bikers, bald-bearded, tattooed, and saw his old comrades, those who lay beside him, under crimson skies. In the fire's glow amid the white night, war and the road became one. Pain and humanity became one. They were no longer strangers. They were brothers, souls left standing in the world. The next morning, the snow stopped. The sky, eerily clear, the weak winter sun lit the Gallatin Valley, glinting off the Harleys lined like a glossy black steel wall. The scent of exhaust, cold smoke, and leather mingled, a potent aroma of freedom. Before the wooden house, a small ceremony was prepared. No priest, no flags, just leather-clad men, heads bowed, and a wooden sign in the yard scrawled with "Brothers never ride alone, ride for the fallen." Frank stood there, his old military jacket on his shoulders, hands clenched. Raven approached, holding a black leather jacket, its back bearing the white-winged, red-skulled Hell's Angels emblem. Below, "Ride for the Fallen," was stitched in silver, gleaming in the sunlight. Raven said nothing for a moment, just looked at Frank with calm eyes, then draped the jacket over his shoulders. "My brothers swore that anyone who saves one of us becomes a brother to all," Raven said, voice rough but firm. "You saved Eli's father, saved our souls. Today you're one of us forever." Frank stood still, feeling the weight and warmth of the thick leather, smelling gasoline, wind, and time in every stitch. He bowed his head, hands trembling as he touched the embroidered logo on the chest. No one spoke. All stood silent, as if waiting for this moment their whole lives. Raven stepped back, raising his hand. 1,000 bikers climbed onto their bikes, hands twisting throttles. In that instant, the engines roared as one, a colossal, fierce sound echoing through the valley like summer thunder. The ground shook, snow fell from branches, crows soared from the forest. But amid the majestic chaos, Frank didn't hear noise. He heard a heartbeat, the heartbeat of thousands beating as one, swearing one vow: live loyal, die free, and leave no one behind. Eli stood beside, hand on Frank's shoulder, shouting over the engines, "Welcome to the family, old man." Frank laughed, a hoarse, choked laugh. He raised his hand, an old soldier's reflex, a crisp military salute, hand to forehead. The 1,000 bikers saw it, raising hands, some lifting helmets, others pressing hands to chests. The valley sank into a strange scene, an old soldier in a new leather jacket, standing amid the storm of 1,000 engines, tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. The wind swept those tears, falling into the snow, mingling with the heat of roaring bikes. Raven stepped forward, raising a hand to the group. "Today," he shouted, voice like a march command, "we don't just ride for the brothers we lost. We ride for this soldier, who lived, endured, and kept his kindness." Cheers erupted, thousands of arms raised. Then wheels began to turn, slowly then faster. The massive Hell's Angels convoy moved, bikes trailing one another, front wheel touching the tracks of the rear, forming a black steel serpent winding through the valley. The engine's roar echoed across the Bridger Range, out to the highway, making passers-by stop and stare. Some neighbors lined the road, waving. Local reporters returned, filming a sight unseen, an old veteran in a Hell's Angels jacket, standing in the snow, saluting the passing bikers, thousands of arms raised in return. Amid the engine's roar, Frank stood unmoving, frozen in indescribable emotion. He no longer heard noise, only his heartbeat merging with the engines. For the first time in decades, he felt he wasn't a lone survivor. He had brothers, a home, the call of freedom, roaring in his blood. As the last bike left the dirt road, leaving exhaust and white smoke in the snow, Frank stood, saluting until the sound faded completely. A soft breeze blew, carrying smoke and warmth. He whispered, almost to himself, "I'm not alone anymore, Tom. I'm home." News of the ceremony and morning parade spread like wildfire in winter. Within hours, images of thousands of helmeted Hells Angels riding through snow and old veterans saluting aired on every local channel. Montana papers ran bold headlines. 1,000 Hells Angels honor Key Sand soldier, kindness knows no uniform. National outlets picked up the story, reporters from Billings and Helena driving to Bozeman to investigate. They couldn't believe those often seen as violent, reckless, dangerous could do something so humane. Quiet Bozeman became a focal point. Locals gathered along the main road where bikers passed. For the first time in years, they didn't shy away or lock doors at the sound of Harleys but opened windows, waving. Kids once told to avoid leather-clad men eagerly stood roadside, snapping photos with those they feared yesterday. A diner on Main Street hung a handwritten sign, "Welcome, Angels. Coffee's on us." Bikers stopped in, each smiling, saying thanks. No more wary glances, no more boundaries. At another corner, a bakery gave free cookies to bikers fixing bikes on the street. An older man told KTVM, "I thought they were criminals. Today I saw them kneel to fix a soldier's roof. Maybe I was wrong." Such words echoed everywhere, the story spreading beyond imagination. Frank Dalton, the reclusive veteran on the town's edge, became a symbol of something simple. Kindness starts small and grows into miracles. He received hundreds of thank you letters, not just from Montana but from Oregon, Texas, even Canada. Many admitted fearing bikers, scorning men like Raven, but now understood that behind the leather tattoos and roaring engines were hearts that shared. A week later, the pastor of Bozeman's small church called Frank. "I want you to speak this Sunday," he said. "About kindness, about what happened." Frank hesitated. He'd never been good with crowds, but looking at the Hells Angels jacket on his wall, he knew he had to. Sunday morning, the church was packed. Hundreds of bikers attended, their bikes neatly lined outside, drawing stares from passers-by. Frank stepped to the pulpit, wearing the jacket Raven gave him. Chest-bearing Ride for the Fallen. He looked at the crowd, old, young townsfolk, veterans, bikers, kids with parents. His voice was slow, rough, warm. "I thought kindness died with my comrades at Key Sand. I lived decades just to remember them. Then one winter night, a lost kid came to my door. I helped him. And the next morning, 1,000 like him showed up in my yard, not to make trouble, but to say thank you." He paused, took a deep breath, and looked at the jacket. "I learned something. Kindness has no uniform, no rank, no color, no emblem. It has one shape, a hand extended at the right moment." The church fell silent. A woman began to cry. A burly biker bowed his head, hiding tears behind dark glasses. As Frank stepped down, the pastor gripped his hand, whispering, "You brought God back to a place we'd forgotten him." That night, NBC Montana aired Frank's speech. The phrase "kindness has no uniform" spread across the state. Schools used it in assemblies. Some Bozeman residents hung "Ride for the Fallen" signs in windows, a tribute to the bikers who changed their worldview. Frank received letters from the Callahan family in Wyoming, Vietnam veterans, biker charities, and veteran groups nationwide. Bozeman, the small town once cold and divided, became the start of something bigger. A town where bikers were no longer feared but respected. Where an old veteran, after half a century of solitude, found family, not in the military, but on the free roads of the forgotten. And from that day, Bozeman was never the same. 2 weeks after the church ceremony, Raven summoned all the Hells Angels to Bozeman. On an empty lot outside town, hundreds of Harleys formed a circle, flags flapping in the wind. Frank stood beside Raven and Eli, his hand resting on the saddle of a restored bike. Eli's old Harley, now painted silver, with "Ride for the Fallen" etched on the fuel tank. Raven stepped to the center, raising a microphone, his deep voice echoing through the mountains. "From today we launch the Ride for the Fallen. We'll ride across Montana, then Wyoming, Idaho, Dakota, to raise funds for forgotten veterans, people like Frank Dalton once was." Cheers erupted. Engines roared like thunder. Frank stood silent, speechless. He never imagined himself a soldier who only wanted a quiet life in a wooden cabin would become the soul of a movement, spreading the fire of compassion nationwide. When Raven handed him a black helmet inscribed with Honor Rider, Frank bowed his head, eyes blurring. "I don't have the strength to fight battles anymore," he whispered to Raven. "But maybe I've got enough to ride with you." Raven clapped his shoulder. "You're not behind us, Frank. You ride with us at the front." The journey began on a February morning, the sun still hidden behind snowy peaks. Frank and Eli rode side by side at the head of the pack. Wind whipped their faces, carrying the scent of metal and melting snow, engines blending into an anthem of freedom. The convoy stretched miles, gleaming against the white highland. They stopped at small towns, Livingston, Big Timber, Billings, where locals lined the streets, waving. Old veterans hobbled out on canes, tears falling as hundreds of bikers paused at run-down nursing homes. They brought no flowers, no flags, only hot coffee and firm handshakes. Frank poured coffee for a wheelchair-bound Korean war vet. "You're Dalton, aren't you?" the man asked, voice trembling. "I read the papers. Thank you for making them remember us." Frank smiled, sitting beside him, sipping bitter coffee. "No one's forgotten, as long as someone keeps telling their story," he said softly. So they rode through each land. At every stop they didn't just give donations, they listened to stories of those who fought, lost, and were left behind. Eli often sat beside Frank, listening, sometimes jotting notes. In Sheridan, Wyoming, they met a veteran living in a truck for 10 years. Frank helped him set up a small tent. Raven gave him an old Hells Angels leather jacket. The man hugged them, crying like a child. That photo later graced USA Today's front page, headlined "Bikers and Veterans, Two Worlds, One Heart." From Montana, the journey spread like wildfire. National media followed. CNN called it the strangest compassion movement of the year. NBC aired a feature, From War to Wheels. Thousands watched Frank's live TV interview. "I didn't think I was special," he said, voice rough and slow. "I just gave a kid shelter from a storm." He called his brothers, "and I realized kindness can roar like a Harley engine." The studio fell silent. Then the audience stood, applauding. Other biker clubs nationwide sent letters, asking to join. Rival groups, Mongols Veterans MC, Iron Legacy, set aside feuds to join. Ride for the Fallen. An online map tracked their journey, stretching from Montana to Texas, then California. At each stop, locals brought coffee, pastries, and hung banners. "Welcome, Angels of Gratitude." Thousands of dollars were raised, but greater than money was the restored faith that even those deemed rebels could lead with compassion. Eli rode beside Frank, sometimes turning to grin. "I think my dad's seeing all this," he said, through the wind. Frank smiled, eyes creased but serene in a way rarely seen. "I think so too, and he's probably laughing because for the first time survivors like us aren't running from the past anymore." The journey paused in Missoula, where they erected a small roadside memorial plaque inscribed, "For every soldier, every brother, every soul that never made it home." Frank laid his hand on the stone, beside Eli and Raven. Behind them, thousands of bikers cut their engines, bowing heads in silence. No tears, only the wind weaving through distant mountains, like a greeting from smiling souls. And so, Ride for the Fallen became more than a ride. It grew into a national movement, a symbol of gratitude spreading across America, sparked by a snowy night in Montana, when an old veteran opened his door to a lost young man. From one small act, they built a wave of kindness, faith, and brotherhood no storm could wash away. 2 months after Ride for the Fallen, Bozeman returned to quiet, but it wasn't the same Bozeman. The once silent roads bore Harley tire tracks, and locals still spoke of that winter when 1,000 bikers came and changed everything. That morning, mist cloaked the Bridger Range, the sky just dawning. Hundreds of Hells Angels gathered before Frank Dalton's yard. Harleys lined along the dirt road to the highway. Exhaust smoke swirled white, breaths mingling in the cold. Raven stepped from the front, in his leather jacket, a tired but kind smile. "It's time for the brothers to ride on," he said, voice warm. "But this house," he pointed to the small wooden porch, "will always be what we call home." Frank nodded, steadying his voice. He'd grown used to morning engines, laughter, coffee, and smoke. Today, as they prepared to leave, the air felt strangely empty. Eli approached, removing a silver chain from his neck, its pendant etched with "Ride Safe, Brother." He took Frank's frail hand, placing the chain in it. "Keep this," Eli said, voice catching. "My dad had one just like it." I want you to wear it, so you know wherever we go, you're on the road with us." Frank gripped the chain, feeling the metal's chill and the warmth of Eli's palm. He nodded silently, hand on Eli's shoulder, eyes full of pride. Raven approached, holding two items, a folded Hell's Angels flag and Tom Callahan's old dog tag. He hung the flag on the porch, beside the faded soldier photos, then placed the dog tag next to it, under Frank's hand-carved words, "In memory of brothers lost and found." Raven stood tall, saluting military style, eyes misty. "My brother may have fallen," he said softly, "but because of you, he's still here, in all of us." Frank didn't reply, only returned the salute, slow and precise, his hand trembling but steady. The wind swept through, making the Hell's Angels flag flutter, its fabric snapping alongside the revving engines. Bikers donned helmets, checked belts, throttles roaring in unison like a farewell song of steel and fire. The sun rose over the snowy peaks, morning light hitting the smoke-shrouded bikes, creating a surreal scene, like dawn rising from metal wings. Eli started his bike, turning for one last look. "You'll be okay, right?" Frank smiled, eyes squinting in the light. "I've been okay since the night you knocked on my door." Eli nodded, twisting the throttle, the engine roaring with pride. Raven signaled. Hundreds of Harleys rolled, tires crushing thin snow, leaving black tracks on the white road. The engines blended with the wind, echoing through the valley like a goodbye. Frank stood on the porch, hand touching the chain around his neck, watching the convoy fade. Sunlight glinted off gleaming chrome, shrinking, then vanishing at the horizon. Only the distant echo of engines remained, like the world's heartbeat. He took a deep breath, the cold wind brushing his silver hair, but his heart felt strangely warm. The house was quiet, but no longer lonely. On the porch, the Hell's Angels flag still flew, Tom Callahan's dog tag glinting. Frank smiled faintly, deeply, gazing where the bikes had gone. In the wind and lingering smoke, he heard Raven's voice echo, "Brothers never leave. Frank, we're just riding another stretch." He nodded softly, whispering back, "Ride safe, brothers," and stood there in Montana's dawn, his smile blending with the wind's breath, peaceful, serene, no longer afraid of solitude. Years passed, winter turned to spring, but Frank Dalton's small wooden house stood firm on the Gallatin hillside, part of the land itself. After the Hells Angels left Bozeman, Frank thought he'd return to quiet days. He was wrong. From across America, bikers came to the house. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They called it the Fallen Cabin, the house of those who fell. Every winter as snow began to fall, Harleys appeared from the hill's base, one by one, lining neatly around the yard. They said nothing, didn't shout. They started their engines in unison, letting them roar for 1 minute, a ritual honoring the fallen. Tom Callahan, soldiers who never returned, and Frank still there, a witness to kindness. The engine's roar blended with the wind, echoing through the valley like a steel prayer. Then they cut the engines, removed helmets, and sat around the yard's fire. Frank brewed coffee, pouring it into old metal mugs. He never took money, only smiled. Brothers don't keep score. In those peaceful days, Frank began teaching neighborhood kids to fix bikes. At first curious, they grew enamored with the engine's sound, the smell of oil and smoke. He showed them how to tighten spark plugs, change oil, clean chains, then told stories no book held, about Kisan, brotherhood. The snowy night, a young man knocked on his door. Each time, his voice was slow, eyes distant, but always ended the same. Kindness never dies. It just waits for someone to light it again. The kids nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling something sacred in his words. One day, a boy from next door asked Mr. Frank, "Why do they call you the Angel Maker?" He smiled kindly, ruffling the boy's hair. "Because they think I make angels, but really, I just open the door for them to walk in." The name Old Man Dalton, the Angel Maker, spread through Bozeman, then the state. People spoke of him as a living symbol of compassion, of reconciliation between worlds thought never to meet, war and the road, soldiers and bikers, solitude and community. Veterans sent letters from across the country, Maine, Texas, Alabama, even Hawaii. Handwritten, some shaky, some with old military pens. They wrote that his story gave them courage to call their kids or visit old comrades. One wrote, "You reminded me surviving isn't a burden, it's a chance to give." Frank read each letter, storing them carefully in a wooden box under his desk. Sometimes, he took them out, dusted them off, and reread them, like talking to distant souls. His wooden house became a pilgrimage site for two-wheeled wanderers. They came to hear him, sit by the fire, feel what the world forgot. faith in humanity. Bozeman's people changed too. No one flinched at Hell's Angels jackets anymore. Each year on Ride for the Fallen anniversary, the town hung red and white flags with silver wings. Diners, repair shops, even the church joined, welcoming bikers. Bozeman became a place where kindness wasn't a slogan, but an action. One afternoon, in the golden light of day's end, Frank sat on his porch, holding a coffee mug, gazing out. On the porch, the Hells Angels flag still flew, Tom Callahan's dog tag beside the faded soldier photos. He stroked the silver chain, inscribed "Ride Safe, Brother," and smiled. He knew he wasn't young, knew time waited for no one, but also knew he'd never be alone again. Out there, on every road, every engine's roar carried part of his story, a story begun on a snowy night, with a cup of coffee and an open door in a storm. And so, as the sun sank behind the Bridger Range, its last light bathing the small house, Frank Dalton sat, the old soldier who found peace, the man the world called, with affection, the Angel Maker. In his final years, Frank Dalton lived in a love he never thought he deserved. His small wooden house on the Gallatin hillside always had visitors. Mornings brought neighborhood kids with cookies, eager to learn bike repair. Noons brought bikers stopping to greet Old Man Dalton. Evenings brought neighbors with coffee or just to chat. On the porch, the Hells Angels flag and Tom Callahan's dog tag fluttered in the wind, faded by time but never their meaning. Frank no longer had strength to travel far, but they said he didn't need to leave. The world came to him. Some days he sat at his desk, writing in a shaky hand. That snowy night was when my life was given back. I thought I was done living until I opened the door for a lost boy. No one knows, but he and the thousands after him saved me. He wrote page after page in his old script, each word brimming with gratitude. The next winter, Frank's health faded. An old battlefield wound in his lung returned, making him cough heavily, struggle to breathe in the cold. But he never complained. "The body's just an old bike," he told Eli during a visit. "As long as the engine inside keeps beating, it can still run." Eli smiled, brewing coffee, watching the frail man hold a smile through labored breaths. "You're the stubbornest man I know," Eli said. "No," Frank replied. Eyes on the porch where the flag flew, "just the luckiest." Weeks later, Frank could no longer go outside, but each morning Eli or Raven stopped by, joined by bikers from elsewhere. They sat around his bed, sharing stories of Ride for the Fallen continuing nationwide, letters of thanks from veterans, photos of kids smiling with scholarships from the movement's fund. Frank listened, a smile on his lips, eyes bright under silver hair. "God didn't let me win the war," he said slowly, "but he let me win loneliness." The next morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, Eli entered, finding Frank still. His hand rested on an open journal, a pen fallen beside. The final page bore trembling words, nearly faint. "If anyone asks how I lived, tell them I opened the door when I heard a knock." Coffee's aroma lingered in the kitchen, the fireplace still warm. Frank passed peacefully, like a man finishing a long ride, the wind on the porch stirring the flag like a farewell. News of Frank Dalton's passing spread faster than Montana's cold winds. 3 days later, Harley convoys poured into Bozeman from Oregon, Nevada, Texas, Michigan, even Canada. The town overflowed with people and bikes, engines echoing through the night like a steel prayer. On the funeral day, over 3,000 bikers in black leather lined the valley. They didn't weep loudly or speak much. As the casket left the wooden house, Raven signaled, and all started their engines. A tremor shook the earth, engines roaring as one, resounding for 60 seconds, like the giant heartbeat of thousands. The Hells Angels flag fluttered, snow falling lightly like white ash. No one said goodbye, for to them, Frank never left. He was just riding a farther road. Eli stepped to a wooden podium in the yard, voice trembling but clear. "Someone asked me what Frank Dalton did to earn the respect of thousands of bikers. I said, he fixed my bike in a blizzard, but he did more. He fixed my soul, and all of ours. He taught us kindness, needs no uniform, only a heart that opens the door." Applause mixed with engine roars. Many nodded, some bikers bowed their heads, crying. Raven placed a red rose on the casket. Eli laid the silver "Ride Safe, Brother" chain in Frank's hand, a promise the journey would never stop. After the farewell, they took Frank to a small cemetery at the Bridger's foot, where he'd said he wanted to rest. A gray granite headstone bore simple, profound words. He helped one man in a storm. 1,000 helped him find peace. Thousands of bikers circled the cemetery, revving engines one last time. The sound echoed through the valley, into the mountains, blending with wind, crow calls, and distant church bells. A minute of silence, then all cut their engines. Only wind and the Hells Angels flag on Frank's old porch fluttered in the dawn light. After the funeral, Eli and Raven stayed in Bozeman a few days. They gathered Frank's journals, letters, and the TC engraved lighter beside the old soldier photos. Raven looked around the wooden house, handprints, scratches, coffee scent, all as if Frank were still there. He didn't just rebuild a house, Raven said softly. He rebuilt faith for us all. Eli nodded, eyes misty. And he didn't die, Raven. He's just riding ahead. The next morning, as first light hit the peaks, the bikers prepared to leave. Hundreds of Harleys roared, exhaust white in the early wind. Raven led, Eli right behind, Frank's leather jacket on the rear saddle, flapping. They didn't leave in sorrow, but in quiet reverence. As the convoy left Bozeman, townsfolk lined the roads, hands raised, some touching their chests, others smiling faintly. The sun rose high, snow melted, warmth spread through the valley. The engine's sound faded, shrinking, then echoing long in the wind. But those who heard it said, it wasn't just engines, it was a heartbeat. The heartbeat of thousands, pulsing to one melody of compassion, brotherhood. And Frank Dalton, the old soldier who opened a door in a blizzard and let light in forever. If you believe kindness can change the world, subscribe to stay updated on more inspiring stories. Thank you for joining the bikers. See you on the next journey, where compassion always revs loud through life.